So, you may have heard that shoplifting was made legal in California, and this is technically not true, but also it might as well be. Hunker down because this is going to be a long, in-depth video.
Thieves are robbing stores without consequence. People are getting mugged on the streets, and murders are at a 13-year high. What has Gavin Newsom done about it? He supported decriminalizing theft.
While the shoplifting crisis in California may seem like a recent story, we actually have to go all the way back to the Stone Age, 2014, to see where this all began. That fateful year, a ballot referendum passed, downgrading theft of property less than $950 US to only a misdemeanor. Funny enough, the program passed was called Proposition 47, the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. Now, I could understand a proposition being named that if you were increasing school funding for security or building streetlights in neighborhoods, but this truly feels like a weird dystopian newspeak stuff, especially considering it did not result in safe neighborhoods. But let's check out the actual documentation first. Proposition 47 implemented three broad changes to felony sentencing laws. First, it reclassified certain theft and drug possession offenses from felonies to misdemeanors. Second, it authorizes defendants currently serving sentences for felony offenses to petition courts for resentencing under the new misdemeanor provisions. Third, it authorizes defendants who have completed their sentences for these previous felony convictions to reclassify those convictions to misdemeanors. The only way I could come to the conclusion that this had anything to do with safe neighborhoods or schools is that, I suppose on paper things would look safer because there would be less registered felons. So even if shoplifting is up 7,000%, you could say, hey, 100% less felons in our neighborhood. Very safe. To be fair, though, the actual goal of this proposition was to reduce prison populations, and some of the funding from this was to be put into rehabilitation programs and generally good stuff. And I don't really even have a major issue with the drug possession offense being downgraded to a misdemeanor. However, and this is a big however, to lump the downgrading of an arguably victimless drug crime in with a crime that has obvious victims, i.e. shoplifting, has made this an infuriating proposition to address, one which has snowballed into a legitimate catastrophe for California. But before we go through the specifics passed in this proposition and the wild story of their implementation years later, a very quick thank you to our sponsor, Noble Gold. Have you ever heard of shrinkflation? Yes, shrinkflation. This is where your candy bar or your burger gets smaller, but the price stays the same. A bit odd, right? I'm not sure about you, but I've noticed this happening all the time, everywhere. Yet the government continue to insist that everything is perfectly fine, inflation is all under control, or that this is just temporary. But that is what they'd say, isn't it? Truth is, this is just inflation. By the back door. Luckily, Noble Gold is ahead of the game here, though. They know that with a precious metal IRA under your belt, you'll hedge these rising prices so you can retire without worrying about it. You'll keep up with the inflation the folks in Washington are trying to hide, and this month, to thank you and to get your precious metal project off to a flying start, Noble Gold is giving away a free 5-ounce solid silver America the Beautiful bullion coin with every qualifying IRA or 401k rollover. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com or call them at 877-646-5347. Alright, so let's get into Proposition 47. As mentioned, this 2014 referendum added a new misdemeanor offense called shoplifting, which means you enter an establishment with intent to commit larceny, i.e. theft of personal property, but you do so during regular business hours and you don't steal more than $950 US worth of goods. How polite of you. This is now always considered a misdemeanor and never a potential felony in California. What does this all actually mean, though? Well, previously in California law, shoplifting was considered theft or petty theft, and often the charges for these theft-related crimes were considered wobblers, meaning the prosecutor and the trial judge would have the discretion to make them a felony offense or reduce the classification to a simple misdemeanor based on the facts of the case and criminal history. The biggest difference between a felony and a misdemeanor being misdemeanors have a limit on sentencing, no more than 1 year in jail. Felonies, dependent on the case, can result in well over a year in state prison. The discretion of judges on how to classify individual thefts within these categories has now been taken away in California, and there are a lot of people who think this is a good thing. Duh, it passed referendum. And let's take a look at why. Firstly, I do reckon a lot of support came from those wanting a reclassification of victimless crimes such as drug possession, which is not something I am arguing against in this video. But there are absolutely those who want sentencing reform for other crimes with victims as well. And typically they will point to cases where people have been charged with maximum jail time for things like theft. And while this is a very unique case I'm referencing in particular, and it was not actually used in the debate around Proposition 47, but instead the 3 strikes law in California, I think it offers a fascinating insight as to why judges would ever sentence theft as a felony, and why the public perception of these sentences can be so skewed. So, what is this case I speak of? Well, Ewing versus California was a case upholding the decision to sentence Gary Ewing to a 25 years to life sentence after he stole 3 $400 golf clubs in the year 2000 from a sports shop. This seems utterly unreasonable on face value. But as usual, if you look at the facts of the case and not just the headlines about it, there's some real nuance here. Gary Ewing was nearly 40 years old when his sentencing took place. He was 22 years old the first time he was caught for theft and got a 6-month suspended sentence in 1984. Fast forward to 1988, and Ewing was convicted of felony grand theft auto and sentenced to a year in jail. 1990, he was convicted of theft again and sentenced to 2 months in jail with 3 years probation. Go to 1992, convicted of battery, 30 days in jail. 93, convicted of burglary, appropriating lost property, unlawful possession of a firearm, and trespassing. Later that same year, he was caught in a string of burglaries and robberies at apartments in Long Beach, where he made off with cash, electronics, and people's credit cards. And finally, to end the year off with a bang, he robbed another apartment complex that December, which he entered with a knife and was found with a glass cocaine pipe. They sentenced him to 9 years in prison. As per usual, he was let out early on parole in 1999, and you'd think perhaps after his sprees of crime and finally getting a chance out of jail, he would have a change of heart, change his ways. But that same year, he stole the 3 golf clubs. Now, also take into consideration here, people typically are only caught for a very small percentage of the actual crime they commit. So it really appeared to the courts as though no manner of sentences, lenient treatment, parole, or anything was actually stopping Ewing from stealing and putting others at risk. With, his past sentences showing he was even possessing deadly illegal weapons while breaking into people's homes. Supreme Court Justice Sandra O'Connor wrote that while the sentence was long, it was the only rational approach when someone continually committed serious felonies and needed to be incapacitated due to their impacts on others' lives. I think I'd be pretty pissed off if a man entered my apartment with a knife, stole all my credit cards, electronics, and cash, and I found out later he was let out early on parole after committing the same crime multiple times. Actually, you know what? I can relate to this, as I was assaulted in broad daylight myself just this year by someone who, after investigation, I found out was on parole. We absolutely need redemption in our justice system, but it must be balanced with a consideration of how too much leniency can impact the innocent and create more victims. Now, I want to clarify, I am not suggesting this absolutely should have been a life sentence for Ewing, and I know this doesn't translate exactly to the Prop 47 policies, but I wanted to use a strong example generally in favor of those who demand sentencing reform to show that even these freak cases have nuance. And truth is, there are a lot of instances where three-strike laws and the previously existing wobbler offenses were crucial tools to give judges and law enforcement the ability to lock away genuine menaces to society. Recently, the tragic death of Kate Tibbetts has highlighted the risk of being too lenient on repeat offenders. The 61-year-old woman had a man break into her house, sexually assault her, murder her, kill her two dogs, and set her house on fire. The offender, Troy Davis, was found to be a parolee with a lengthy record. His rap sheet included robberies, burglaries, battery, resisting arrest, and so on. And many have argued, even Kate's own family, that this is a direct result of California's weak on crime policy. One article states, California has built a system where it is hard to get into prison but easy to get out. Realignment, Prop 47, Prop 57, Newsom good time credits increase, Newsom mandated zero cash bail. All of these policies are pillow soft on crime. They rob law enforcement of power and the ability to hold criminals accountable. So when I see these Prop 47 supporters lay out their complaints about how judges shouldn't be able to have the discretion to give out felony charges or harsher sentences for various theft crimes, even when considering lengthy amounts of past offenses, I just don't find that to be an incredibly convincing argument. In reality, if you commit a first-time theft, especially a small shoplifting offense in California, even before 2014, it's really unlikely that you're going to face jail time. In fact, the case of Gary Ewing proves this. His first offense, he got a suspended sentence, so no jail time. His second, he got only 2 months. In some cases, like if you took something that was $50, that could even be downgraded to just an infraction. So when we talk about giving judges discretion to apply felony charges, we're not discussing dudes stealing a loaf of bread Les Mis style.
It warns you're a dangerous man. I stole a loaf of bread.
We're looking at multiple instances of crime and continual threat to the public. And to be fair to Proposition 47, one of their rules is that while they allow previous felons to challenge their judgments and have it reduced to a misdemeanor if their felony has been reclassified now, they actually do not allow this for people who have committed serious violent felonies or sex offenses. So even this proposition sort of recognizes the importance of compounding crime in sentencing. And not everything about Prop 47 was horrible. It did obviously lead to its intended outcome of reducing the amount of people in prison since longer and harsher sentences were off the table. And I'm sure there were some people let out earlier, not put in, that genuinely did want to change, and that was a good thing for them. But for all the seemingly good parts of this reform, the consequences undeniably outweigh them, as the largest impact this has had since its implementation is theft being far more appealing to criminals. Now, I don't know if this was because governments have requested Google remove it or what, but I literally had the most difficult time trying to find research on how often people get away with theft. Just like nothing available. Even Google Scholar was a wasteland. So I'm going to cite the 15-year-old girls I knew in high school who shoved Walmart makeup into their Ugg boots and bras and never got caught once as my academic resource or reference that most people get away with it. Even if you interview criminals themselves, like in this BBC article, she said she gets away with it 90% of the time. So this is solid data, all right, guys? Considering this, let's do the Thieves risk evaluation in our minds. Pre-2014, I could walk into a shop and get $900 of stuff. Unlikely I'll be caught, but on the off chance I am, I could face years in jail and have a felony on my record, which will impact me for the rest of my life. And worse, if I'm a serial offender, that's going to add up on my jail time when I go to court. Could be a long-ass time behind bars. Probably won't take that chance. Versus post-2014. I could walk into a shop and get $900 of free stuff. Good chance I won't get caught, and even if I do, unlikely I'll get jail time. It's not going to hurt my future that much. Job applications don't even ask about misdemeanors, only felonies. And even if I am a serial offender, and they add that up in court, there's a limit on sentencing. No chance I'll be in there for more than a year. The odds are looking in my favor. Of course there is going to be more theft. Of course! And this isn't armchair criminal psychology. This isn't a political assumption or a hypothetical. This is how Proposition 47 has panned out in the real world in California. 4 years after implementation of these rules, the Public Policy Institute of California released a deep dive study into the impact of Proposition 47 on crime and recidivism. And the study was very nuanced, looked at all sides. It found good impacts in some cases of reducing prison population. But on the other hand, when assessing the impact of downgrading theft penalties, the study found a statistically significant impact on the increase of crime. We estimate that Prop 47 led to a rise in the larceny theft rate of about 135 per 100,000 residents, an increase of close to 9% compared to the 2014 rate. And that's data from not much longer after it was implemented. And, sadly, this data does match up with on-the-ground accounts as well. While I am not a huge fan of the LA Times, they did do a good article on the unintended consequences of the proposition, interviewing a man named Samisi Sina, who claimed he did not start stealing bikes until Prop 47 raised the threshold for a felony theft to above $950. The 30-year-old has stolen bicycles from his Hacienda Heights neighborhood. He has skipped out on drug treatment and kept up his meth habit. He has racked up 16 arrests, earning himself a place near the top of the county sheriff's department's list of repeat offenders picked up for theft or drug use. Big achievements here, man. And he says a new law has made it easier for him to commit all these crimes. Now you can get away with it because of Proposition 47, Sina said recently in an interview at his parents' home, of course. The article continues. Law enforcement officials and others have blamed Proposition 47 for allowing repeat offenders like Sina to continue breaking the law with little consequence. Crime has risen in the state's largest cities, setting off debate over whether the proposition is responsible. Pause. What debate? They're literally interviewing Sina, and he's like, hey guys, by the way, Proposition 47, that's the reason I'm stealing bikes. And they're like, this is a very nuanced debate. We just can't figure out why he's increased his crime, why he started stealing bikes. And he's like, hey, stealing bikes because of Prop 47, that's why I'm doing it. In some areas, street cops are making fewer narcotics arrests. And without the threat of a felony conviction and a lengthy stint behind bars, fewer drug offenders are enrolling in court-ordered treatment in Los Angeles and other counties. Another really interesting observation of this article is officers were pointing out how they're just not arresting people as much for misdemeanor crimes because they know full well it won't lead to much of a sentence anyways. What's the point of filling out 4 hours of paperwork when they'll just be back in and out of the system in no time, and their misdemeanors never add up to any meaningful charges? So in some ways, theft being downgraded from a potential felony to a misdemeanor has also led to it being downgraded to not a crime at all in some cases, especially when it feels like the main effort is no longer to punish crime, but to reduce prison populations. Now, this article was published in 2015, and there is a lot of speculation in it saying that it's just too early to judge the impacts of Provision 47, with supporters stating that all its skeptics are just scapegoating it as the reason for crime increase rather than looking at other complexities. But both the older data, finding a 9% theft uptick from the Public Policy Institute, and newer data beg to differ with this cope. A study released just this year, conducting a more recent analysis of the impacts of Prop 47, found that in Santa Monica, California, crimes unaffected by the ballot referendum fell by 9%. But those crimes which were downgraded, so crimes which were lowered to a misdemeanor by Prop 47, increased by 15%. Perhaps there was some wiggle room to deny the impacts of Prop 47 in 2015, but not so much anymore. I mean, really, even when the New York Times are willing to acknowledge retail theft has become a major problem in California, you know their rose-colored glasses around sentencing reform probably got stolen by a repeat offender. The article states this year, Brendan Dugan, the director of Retail Crime Division at CVS Health, called San Francisco one of the epicenters of organized retail crime, and said employees were instructed not to pursue suspected thieves because encounters had become too dangerous. We've had incidents where our security officers are assaulted on a pretty regular basis in San Francisco, he continued. Commander Raj Vaswani, the head of investigations at San Fran Police Department, claims the one trend we are seeing is more violence and escalation, and much more bold. And we see a lot of repeat offenders. I wonder why there would be so many repeat offenders. I wonder what policy would possibly result in repeat offenders not getting stronger sentences for repetition of crime. How odd. On a serious note, this has become impossible not to notice, with politicians even beginning to address it, thank goodness. Just this July, Gavin Newsom signed a law into effect which, and I really want to emphasize this, reestablishes the crime of organized retail theft and allows prosecutors to once again seek to charge the crime as either a misdemeanor or a felony. Clearly, even Democrat Gavin Newsom can see that the ability for prosecutors to have room for felony charges in repeated and extreme circumstances reduces crime, and was perhaps somewhat necessary to the functionality of their cities. Sadly, though, it does appear this is too little too late, with many businesses choosing to move their retail stores out of California entirely. Representatives from Walgreens have said that thefts at its stores in San Francisco were 4 times the chain's national average, and that it had to close 17 stores largely because the scale of thefts had made business untenable. And I can't imagine just being a small business owner or individual having to deal with this massive uptick of crime there. You know, $900 is not a small sum for the average person. That is make or break for some small businesses, make or break for people's groceries and rent for the month, let alone all of the job losses that would be occurring due to the exodus from California. And yes, I am aware there are a lot of mainstream articles claiming the exodus from California isn't real because the numbers aren't showing an increase of residents leaving, but perhaps consider that many people would like to leave but can't due to COVID, due to unemployment, and due to simple financial difficulties, which is why the only people we're seeing move en masse out of California are the wealthy class, celebrities, business owners, and corporations. They can afford to do so. The Hoover Institute of Stanford University found that California had seen 265 companies leave for other states since 2018, with 114 of those moving to Texas alone. And while there are a lot of smaller businesses included in that, there are some massive names as well, like HP Enterprise and Oracle. And to me, this whole thing is just fascinating. To observe how this one seemingly small referendum could exacerbate a major crime boom, which snowballed into such catastrophic impacts for the state. You know, how when it comes to crime sentencing and reform, there really are no solutions, only trade-offs, and this is proof of that. I get why people wanted to change the criminal justice system here. I have some major critiques of it myself, and I don't think that change is off the table. And, you know, there does need to be room for redemption in any moral society. But should we have so much redemption that we then have more care and sympathy for criminals than we do their victims? More care given to criminals than the actual communities which they ravage and destroy? You know, I'm a Christian, so I believe in the idea of redemption, but even biblically, consequences for the harm you do to others exist. And most importantly, redemption and forgiveness is only given in the face of genuine desire to change your ways. Redemption without these things is a farce. And it results in your society continually throwing pearls before swine, criminals taking advantage of the goodwill of others repeatedly. I don't fault Democrats or anyone who supported Proposition 47 for their desire to give people a second chance. I think that is a wonderful trait to have. I do fault them for not using common sense when pursuing that goal, though, and as such, condemning their communities to horrific ends. And mostly, you know, I fault these people for not placing higher the good of the victims of crimes first. Victims who I find far too often go forgotten by the contrarian do-gooders who want to, you know, save the bad guy. I could go on about that topic for a very long time, but this has been a long video and I should wrap it up. I found the subject fascinating to look into, so I hope you guys learned something and found it interesting as well. And if you did, please like, please share, please comment, all that good stuff to get the algorithm going, because YouTube certainly isn't helping out at all. And a big thank you to all of my subscribed star supporters for making these little rants possible. I will see you all next time. Bye.